Let's go ahead and open in prayer.
I'm gonna stop.
If you'll join me, we'll begin in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Take, Lord, and receive all my glory, my memory, my understanding, and my entire love. All I have and call my own, you have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. Guys, when we're doing the prayer, let's just do the prayer. We don't need to rifle through our notes or put our bags away. I mean, appreciate we want to be ready for class, but it'll all wait for the prayer. It's okay. Let's put our first things first. Okay, we have 3 objectives today for the class today. You should be able to do these 3 things. If by the end of class you cannot do these 3 things, I've told your teacher, I'll do my best, please do your best. Somebody read number 4. Thank you, Colin.
Identify the long-term causes and the immediate circumstances that led to World War I.
Yes, today we're going to talk about World War I, and we're going to identify, basically, people ask, the great question of world history is what caused World War I. And historians basically say there was long-term causes and short-term causes. We'll identify the 4 generally accepted long-term causes, and then what was the spark that actually lit the fire. So the long-term and short-term. Somebody like to read number 5, please. Thank you, Abby.
Describe the first two years of the war and summarize American public opinion.
Yes, very good. So the war starts out as totally a war in Europe. It does not involve the United States. We're going to talk about the progress of the war for the first couple of years and what was American opinion on the war. Would somebody like to read number 6, please? Thanks, Jack.
Summarize why America entered the Great War.
Yes. When it became our fight, we'll talk about what dragged us in there. So when you go home tonight and your parents say, what'd you learn in school today? You don't have to look at them and say, nothing. Like you can say, it's Jakes, you get a mother, father, show, identify the long-term causes and the immediate circumstances that led to World War I. They'll say, why, yes, child, that'll make a thrilling dinner time conversation. You'll have something to talk about. How exciting will that be? Huh? So very exciting indeed. Roman numeral number 4. Yes. Yes. I learned a new acronym yesterday.
What was it?
MAIN. Do you know how I learned this acronym? While losing a snowball fight in the very game you were playing. It's one of the questions. Like, what's the deal? I'd never heard this before. So, MAIN. And if I had known this 1 week ago, I would have put subpoint A in this order, but I didn't. So we're going to go out of order. Okay, so let's begin. We're going to start with nationalism as a long-term cause. We're nationalism, and here we want to make sure we use our words carefully. So nationalism is the devotion to one's interests and the culture of one's nation. And the thing with nationalism that sets it apart from like patriotism or pride is that it's an unusual amount of devotion. It's a devotion at the cause of others. So it's the power supply? Awesome. This is the one that doesn't work. It's missing the power supply. Cool, thank you. It's good to know. Okay. Nationalism is basically pride in a country, but an unusual pride in the country that goes in and it creates competition or jealousy between nations. And the nationalism is one of those things that fueled a fear of Germany. So Germany is not an old country. Germany is not an old country. It's basically when the old Holy Roman Empire collapsed, that happened in the 1800s. And it unified into a single unified country of Germany at the end of the 19th century. And when that happened, it immediately sparked an industrial revolution in Germany and an economic explosion in Germany that the rest of Europe kind of didn't see coming. And it really made them worry while all the countries are beginning to galvanize under nationalism, and they're seeing suddenly a new rival has entered into the realm. So nationalism isn't new, but it's a new level of threat. Napoleon used nationalism to rally up the French troops in the Napoleonic Wars. It's not a new thing. But nationalistic fear, as well as like the fear of Germany together. A lot of various ethnic groups were dominated by outsiders. Kind of the classic description is sort of this Austria-Hungary, Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria. Kind of this area, there's a lot of different ethnic groups that are in here. And they're all kind of governed under varying levels of control by outsiders. And it feels like outsiders are keeping us down, right? I mean, that's kind of the feeling of it. Russia, this is a fun side story that hadn't mattered for a long time and suddenly becomes terribly important, is that Russia begins to think of itself as the protector of other smaller countries. So the Russians, the word Russia, it means the land of the Rus. Rus is an ethnic group, but they begin to think of themselves as like the protectors of all the Russian people and all of the various Eastern European, Slavic kind of cultures, which means that Russia thinks of itself as the big brother of Eastern Europe. So like this part of Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, they're all either Russian or Slavic, and Russia kind of thinks of themselves as the big brother. These are small countries, they'll get pushed around, but I got their back. So that's first piece, nationalism. Our second one we'll talk about is imperialism. Now, the United States has been dealing with imperialism for a while. It was even, the inspired title of our chapter, our unit 2 of the empire business, this idea of imperialism. But we see it developing in Europe the same way as it develops in the United States, and in particular, Germany. Germany, again, its growing industry pushed Germany and its rivals to take new overseas territories. There's a feeling that the big and important countries of Europe should grow in their importance by taking over lesser parts of the world. I love this graphic of England and France carving up the earth as if they're carving it up for their own empires. This is a famous painting in Germany of the Congress of Berlin, where the entire continent of Africa was it's basically at a meeting in Germany. The entire continent of Africa was divided up as to what countries could take over what parts of it as colonies, as if it was some Europeans' prerogative to do so. Congress of Berlin, one of those change the world moments that I don't think enough people really understand the impact of. But it's classic imperialism. And even though it takes place in 1878, it's still the world, it's still the reality in the 20th century on the crest of World War I. Countries hoping to expand their empires to support resources and trade, and imperialism was fueled by nationalism. Our country is awesome. Not only should we take colonies, but it's almost like we would be doing them a favor if we did. That's the feeling of imperialism. So nationalism, imperialism, militarism. To take over countries means to develop a military which would allow that to be possible. Developing modern armed forces and using those armed forces as a tool of diplomacy. You wouldn't attack a country with a huge army. And if a country with a huge army wanted to enter negotiations with you, you might listen to them a little more carefully. The cost of building a huge empire meant that you also had to have a huge military to do so. And so these two things, militarism and imperialism, kind of fuel each other. You need a big military to take over territories, but then the territories produce money, which can help you build a huge military. They become self-fulfilling pieces. By 1890, Germany had the strongest army in all of Europe, which is pretty amazing because Germany was a new country, but by 1890, it's the strongest army in Europe. Their competition with England in sea power led others to join the naval arms race. So England actually didn't have a huge army. England was known for their navy, which makes sense. It's an island nation. So they had a huge navy. So Germany builds up this huge army. Makes sense. They are a largely, territorial country. Their ocean access isn't very good. It opens up to the North Sea. This part opens up into the Baltic. This is trading country, but not really like military threatening. So Germany has a big army, Britain has a big navy, but then Germany's like, man, we should have a navy too. And they begin rivaling England to do so. And then that sets off like an arms race in the European continent. 4. And all of this is held together with an alliance system. An alliance system where they all basically are worried that they will rival each other for power and need to mutually secure the peace. And the thinking is that if every country has a big brother that can whoop the others, no one will throw the first punch. I love this political cartoon. You see little tiny Serbia down here, the little brother. He's wearing the sash that says Serbia. And he's looking at this big scary behind him, says, if you touch me, I'll... And then Austria is raising his fist behind him, says, if you make a move, I'll... And then behind Austria is Russia, who's the protector of the Serbians, right? And if you hit that little feller... I don't usually expect Russians to say that. And then over here, Germany's got his hands on Russia, he's got his hands on Austria, and if you strike my friend, I'll... And here's France running into the fight, late and supposedly threatening people. France doesn't threaten. If you hit him, I'll... And then like here's England back behind it, he's wearing the top hat. You see the big fat guy, his name is John Bull. He is the personification of Great Britain. And he's running in to go get France's back. Anyway, the countries divide out into essentially 2 camps, known as the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. Now, you might know this acronym, but let's go ahead and do it so we're all on one side. You have the Entente. The way I remember this is great, big, fat rats. Great Britain, France, and Russia. Great, big, fat rats is the Triple Entente. The way I remember the alliance is that Grandma... I'm writing out Grandma. No. Grandma is always hungry, but that's not the way I remember it. I remember that Grandma always hated idiots. It's Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy. I almost wrote idiots over there. So Grandma always hated idiots. Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Okay, so you have these 2 camps. The Ottoman Empire entered on the side of the alliance. So Grandma always hated idiots and the Ottoman Empire. Grandma always hated idiots and the Ottoman Empire. The acronym kind of breaks down to this, but that's kind of the way I remember it. And then those 2, and so the Entente side wouldn't threaten the Allies side because as soon as somebody attacks the idiots, then Germany and Austria-Hungary and the Ottomans will swoop in and get the idiots back, right? So it just, you don't beat up a person with a posse, basically, and both sides have a posse. There's this great like subplot that all of these countries kind of know each other, and that the leaders of Russia, England, and Germany are all like cousins. They hang out at family reunions and stuff. Their grandmother is all Queen Victoria. It's a pretty small world when you're that close to the top. So this is the long-term causes that these things all designed to grow and yet stay stable. That's an unsustainable model. Was tipped off. Is that somebody knocking?
Intruders.
Hello. Hi, come on in. Come on in.
That's good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good day. Happy Halloween.
Say hey, say it back.
I love how Maxie.
I got some food, guys.
Oh, you're cool.
I know, right?
Am I wrong? No.
Right next to your computer. Oh, is that it?
No, that's the United States
How
Capitol.
is it next to it? The little.
You set it up there though.
I did?
Watch you set it down
Yeah.
there.
I said this.
No, you put it in your pocket.
I did put it in my
Oh, I
pocket.
thought you said that.
Thanks, Jake. Let's get you a sticker for that.
Wait, I guess.
Good guess. You solved the problem, man. Alright, good. So there's a long-term and a short-term cause, and the short-term cause as kind of a screwball event. Kind of a screwball event. The Balkan Peninsula is this part under Austria-Hungary that's Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia. The Ottoman Empire controls territory over here too. There's some parts that are like rivaled or uncertain of its, like who's actually in charge of it. And all of the Balkan Peninsula, this term we still sometimes use today if something is Balkanized. That means that you take something that could be united, but it's all divided and infighting. So don't say this if this is part of your world, but like sometimes I've played on a team before that is like the team should all be playing together, but it feels like everybody kind of hates each other. We would say that team feels Balkanized. Or like they should be united, but you're not. Okay, don't say that if that's your world. But the Balkan Peninsula was also called the powder keg of Europe. This is an analogy that's kind of lost to us moderns because we don't keep barrels of gunpowder around. I don't. Shouldn't speak for you. But it's dangerous. A powder keg is dangerous, and any stray spark could make everything explode. So what happened in Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was not the leader of Austria-Hungary. He was the next in line. He was to become the leader soon because the actual leader was very old and was dying. Archduke Franz Ferdinand realized that Austro-Hungarian domination of the Balkan Peninsula was probably a mistake, and he was a reformer that would try to clean up the dual empires' influence over there. However, in the meantime, he was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist, this guy who looks like he got jacked in the face up there.
Because he probably did.
He probably did. Who led a small and awkward terrorist gang who ambushed and shot him.
Wait, why do you say, oh,
I'll try to explain here at the end. Okay, I've got an illustration that it's not a very good terrorist gang. Yeah.
If Ferdinand was trying to like write all that,
Yeah.
I hate it.
Well, the feeling was also that if he was a reformer in the Balkan Peninsula, he might also stop people from being mad but never solve the problem. The thinking was that maybe he would placate people and actually continue to dominate, just more friendly. And so they had to get rid of them so they could actually have their actual revolution and get true independence. In response, so then it was found out that that actually the Serbian government was funding this terrorist gang. And so Austria-Hungary says, oh, well if the Serbian, this isn't just the action of one crazed gunman, we've got an entire national government who's supporting this. And Austria-Hungary says, you can't just go around killing our leaders. And so Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia and invades. And Russia says, hey, those are our people. We're the protectors of the Slavic nations. So Russia says, you can't just declare war on them. You pick a fight with them, you pick a fight with me. So Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. And Germany says, you can't just declare war on Austria-Hungary. You declare war with them, you declare war with me. And the dominoes just tip one after another. And within like 90 days of a rogue terrorist, all of Europe descends into war. Yeah.
Didn't Germany declare war on two countries at once?
They do, because once you declare war on Russia, you declare war on France, and so Germany's now fighting a two-front war on either side of their country.
And then Great Britain declared war on Germany.
That's it, domino after domino. So how does it carry out? Roman numeral number 5. Germany is so even though Austria-Hungary is the instigator, Germany is the main agitator. They're the ones with all of the real power to threaten and hurt. So Germany sets up what is called the Schlieffen Plan, which is a fun word to say. The Schlieffen Plan was the way they were going to fight in the Great War. The Schlieffen Plan said, I'm going to go back on that slide. Germany says, we know that Russia is a huge threat and will ultimately whoop us. But we also know the Russians are disorganized and they won't get their act together very fast. So Germany says, we're going to quickly beat France because France will put up a fight faster, but they're French, so they'll die faster and they'll be easier to beat. So we'll go attack France first, whoop them, and then we can turn and face Russia. That's kind of the idea of the Schlieffen Plan. So hold Russia, defeat France, and then attack Russia. And in August of 1914, German troops swept through Belgium to go attack onto France. Belgium had its alliance with Great Britain, which dragged Great Britain into this war also. This is a complicated set, but I think every piece falls just like it could be predicted to fall. They caused a major refugee crisis, and basically a lot of Europeans were pretty homeless for a long time. By spring of so it was August 1914. By spring of 1915, within a few months, within the school year, 2 parallel systems of trenches crossed through France. So France is where most of the fighting of World War I happens. It happens elsewhere, but the major theater of World War I happens in France. And it sets up in these trench networks that run across the country. So the way it would work was that a person, one side would build a front line trench for shooting over no man's land to the trench on the other side. There would be a network of trenches with routes back to one in the back where there'll be support trench, and this is where foods and rations would be kept, or extra bullets, and they would run it up to the front. And literally people would just be in a ditch, pop up, shoot their gun, and then get back down before they get shot again. And this is trench warfare. It also rains, and so the trenches just fill up with water. The people stand in mud and filth, and it's gross, and there's rats. And they start building little platforms, and let's walk on duckboards and stay out of the water, but that, they fall apart and they squish in. The French trenches were all known as the worst of the worst. German trenches, the Germans are engineers, they're nice, they sit up straight, full of Audis and stuff. But and the British trenches were actually pretty well organized too, but the French ones were just awful. They're all bad, but the French were the worst of the worst. And they set up in trench warfare. Between the trenches on either side was an area known as no man's land. No man's land was a barren expanse of mud. I mean, ultimately, after a while, all the trees get bombed, and it's just a desolate field where the bullets fly between them. And it becomes super hard for either side to actually gain any ground. Because if you want to go and advance onto the other side, you got to get out of the ditch. And if you get out of the ditch, you're at risk for getting shot by bullets, right? And so trench warfare turns out to be a pretty effective way of killing a whole bunch of people without actually advancing anywhere in the war. It's a wonderful way to get people killed for nothing to show for it. Americans look at this and they say, what in the world? Why, this seems terrible. And Americans are like, I kind of hate it, right? Why watch all of this happen? But Americans also said, this isn't our problem. If Europeans want to line up and shoot each other, that sucks, but it doesn't involve us. There's also the old question of the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary that we don't go crossing oceans. Europe's problems are Europe's problems. And as tragic as they are, they're not our problems. And then American opinion is further divided. Take, for instance, the socialists. Socialism was a major political movement at the time. And socialists said, okay, Germany and England are these like capitalist, imperialist countries who are all fighting each other, and there's no good sides as they try to control markets and build empires, and we should stay out of it. So the socialists say, like, every side is evil. Then there are the pacifists. Perhaps the greatest pacifist was Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State. He's in this photo on the left. We have met him before. William Jennings Bryan, our old guy that never goes away, Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson's administration. William Jennings Bryan would actually later resign his position when we entered the war. He's like, I'm a pacifist. This isn't my thing. I think we should get out of it. I'm like, well, you're Secretary of State. He's like, no, I'm not. And he just like quits and walks up. William Jennings, principled man. Okay. William Jennings Bryan believed that all war was evil and the United States should set an example of peace to the world. Most American, just like ordinary Americans, people like you and me, we're just against it. Look, this isn't our fight. America stands nothing to gain out of getting involved with it. If we did, most native-born Americans felt a bond with Great Britain. They said that if we had a side on this, we'd probably fight on the side of the English. We speak English. We have a common history. We'd probably come in on the British side with respect to our ancestry. In general, we had stronger ties, economic ties with the Entente side. Great Britain, France, and Russia. Great Britain and France were major trading partners for us. The alliance side, we did a little business with Germany, less with Austria-Hungary, somewhat more with Italy, basically none with the Ottoman Empire. So like we had a better trading relationship with the Entente side. So if we came in, we'd probably come in on the Entente side. But we also had waves of American immigrants coming from Germany and Austria-Hungary, and there's like a lot of ethnic ties that are taking us to both sides of this thing. Wilson, for his part, says, we're not entering on either side. Okay, so we got to remember Wilson, back from Unit 2. Wilson is the guy of moral diplomacy, that we only get involved in fights if we can defend democracy. And he said, we can't come in on the side of the Entente. Great Britain is basically a democracy. Yes, they have a king, but they have a functioning parliament, and they're more or less a democracy. France is a democracy, but Russia is run by the Tsars. This is an absolute monarchy. It is the least form of democratic government. So Wilson can't come in on that side. Hi.
Hi.
Come on in.
Hi.
They're all the same, but you forgot your favorite. Yeah. Look at these costumes. Oh, man. Deflated dinosaur.
I know, they've seen better days.
Yeah, see you.
Too many Halloween events.
The dinosaurs they didn't perish, they just deflated.
Yes, Billy just saying he's got a decapitated T-Rex. Might be a little dark for some people.
That's awesome. Yeah, see, happy Halloween! Every time I set this down, I lose my clicker. There we go. Okay, so Wilson won't come in on the side of the war because he says there's no good guy to come on inside, and Wilson refused to ally himself with the dictator. Tsar Nicholas II was not the best czar in the history of Russia, but I think dictator's a little harsh. I think he was a pretty nice dictator. By 1917, though, the United States began to realize that we were going to get dragged into this thing, and I'll explain how. Roman numeral number 6. What happens is that Great Britain puts a naval blockade on Germany. Great Britain puts a naval blockade on Germany. Germany has a great army. They do not have a great navy. Great Britain has a great navy, not a great army, but they are at war. And so Great Britain uses its strongest asset, their naval blockade, and they say basically Germany's main port of trade is the North Sea, and they put sea mines in the North Sea. They mine the North Sea. So you remember Finding Nemo, the party balloons, right? Those are sea mines. They're actually a real thing. They explode if a boat touches them, and they float, and they put them all around the sea. So basically, the British have them mapped, and they can, float around them, but you'll blow your boat up. So the English mine the North Sea, and they block Germany from getting any trade in. Germany is also doubly screwed because their main trading partners, like everything else, has to go by land through one of their enemies or through a different war zone over here. So like Germany gets stuck with nothing coming in or out of the country. And that naval blockade becomes so strong, sorry, I'm gonna hear myself, that famine hit the country in 1916, and they're wartime, they can't really develop their agricultural resources, and they start to run out of food. And the farms that they do have need fertilizer and fresh seed, and they can't get any of that in or out of the country. And there's like real starvation hitting Germany. And Germany was like, England's actually trying to starve us to death. And that's a way different level of warfare. That's no longer attacking the army, that's attacking the people. And Germany felt like they're a target of unfair warfare. Now, the United States, we did do some business with Germany. What's the United States think about this? The United States says it's a violation of the open door policy that came from our imperialism unit, that we have. Nations of the world are expected to keep an open door for trade. So John Hay's open door notes now suddenly look like England, maybe our ally, is violating our trade rights. We're not in this war. America is neutral in this. We should be able to do business with either side. And so we take this as a violation. So America is considered a spirit of the open door policy. But before the United States could really address this, Germany tried to address it themselves. And here's what Germany announces. We've been blocked at sea. We will retaliate at sea. Any ship traveling in international waters, flying a flag of our enemy, is a target. And they are a target whether or not we can tell them they're a target, or whether or not they're a warship, or whether or not they're going to threaten us at all. If you're flying a flag of our enemy, then you are our enemy. And it happens with the Lusitania in 1915. Lusitania is a passenger ship. It's not a warship. It's just how people travel. And this is not considered a fair target of war. But it's an English ship. And it sailed under, no, it's French. And it sailed under a French flag. The Germans asserted that the Lusitania was also smuggling weapons, which suddenly makes it a fair target. But everybody's like, no, it's not a cruise ship, because cruises are like pleasure, but it's a travel ship. It's like, it's not smuggling weapons. Later it was discovered the Lusitania had a secret hold built in it exactly for smuggling weapons. There was like one hidden in there, and the Germans knew about it. But a German U-boat, a submarine, an undersea boot, an underwater boat, torpedoed and sank the Lusitania, which was just a passenger ship full of people just traveling. On board the Lusitania were 11 Americans.
Wait,
And-
It says
when you said they
128.
later found the little thing,
Yeah.
smuggling
So, like,
weapons in it?
We'll never know, but probably.
Oh.
Yeah, probably was smuggling. So on May 7th, 1915, a U-boat sank the Lusitania. Sorry, that wasn't 11. There's 128 Americans. 128 Americans killed. Passenger ships weren't considered fair targets for war, but they argued that this was hauling ammunition. Now Americans are dying in the war, and American public opinion begins to turn. They're like, man, Americans were just traveling. They're not fighting this war, and now you're killing Americans on it. So American public opinion began calling for war. Wilson, for his part, doesn't want to get into this. He's actually going to campaign in 1916 as the president who kept us out of war. And he wants a negotiation instead. His famous line, and I think this is really noble rhetoric, and I'm not a Woodrow Wilson fan, but I think this is really noble. He says, it must be a peace without victory. Only a peace between equals can last. He says, if you're going to go try to achieve peace by fighting for war, that's an unstable peace that will break down. You have to have a peace between equals. That's real peace. Only a peace, the very principle of which is equality and common participation, is a common benefit. That peace means more than the absence of war. And if you just try to bomb your enemies into submission, that's not peace. Wilson ruled out a military response. He hoped to negotiate one instead. And then Germany sank another liner. This one, the Sussex. There were Americans on that ship also. And Wilson protested Germany's policy. Germany said, okay, you want us to quit sinking ships, America? Get England to lift the blockade. We're starving over here. Find us a way to get us food so we don't starve. And if you don't, then we have to just continue this submarine warfare. Woodrow Wilson ran for president in 1960 against, this is kind of some fun political history, against Charles Evans Hughes, who was a Supreme Court justice. You have a sitting Supreme Court justice running for president. Like, curious. Charles Evans Hughes, a Republican running against Woodrow Wilson. And these guys, basically, they focus on World War I. Woodrow Wilson campaigns as the president who kept us out of war. And Charles Evans Hughes says, dude, we're going to war. You're either going to be ready or you're not. So you're promising peace, but you're lying to people because we're going to war. Yeah.
If he was to do a Supreme Court justice, like, could he be president and?
No, he would resign one. Yeah. So Charles Evans Hughes says we're going to defend America's interests. We're losing Americans. We're losing trading partners. We're going to stick up for ourselves. And so these two face off in 1916. It was a close election. And actually, on election night, it was kind of unclear who won. And Charles Evans Hughes went to bed thinking he had won this election. As they continued to count all night long, they realized that a couple of states they thought were Hughes's flipped to Wilson. A reporter called Justice Hughes and said, looking for a comment here on this. And his aide answers the phone and he says, I'm sorry, the president cannot be disturbed. The reporter replies, well, when he wakes up, tell him he's no longer president.
Oh.
Savage.
That's awkward.
Yeah. Pretty line, though. Woodrow Wilson wins re-election. And in 1917, re-inaugurated, second inaugural, and Wilson tried to mediate the conflict, calling again for the peace between equals. Despite calls for peace, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany announced that U-boats would be sinking all ships in British waters, which almost certainly meant that we were going to lose more Americans. Wilson realized this and said, even though I promised that I was the president that kept us out of war, we're probably going to war. Wilson said, though, I'm going to wait for Germany to make actual, overt acts. Little number 2, Germany made actual, overt acts. January of 1917, a telegram was intercepted from the German foreign minister to Mexico. The telegram is known as the Zimmermann Note. So he's a German diplomat dealing with the country of Mexico. And the Zimmermann Note proposed that Germany and Mexico form an alliance to go fight the United States. And if successful, Germany would help Mexico reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona back for the nation of Mexico. Now today this sounds like, really? You're having Mexicans attack America? Like, it just seems a little ridiculous. America, the biggest, strongest country in the world. But you also got to remember, Wilson had previously sent John Pershing into Mexico to go find Zapata and Pancho Villa. And we were almost blowing up in war a couple of years before this. It's hard to tell in the US history class timeline, but like all of this is kind of happening at once. And it looks like now they're baiting Mexico into kicking off the war that we didn't get into before. Then Germany sunk 4 unarmed American merchant ships, killing more Americans. The final piece of resistance, the final thing that was keeping Wilson out of the war. Because ultimately Wilson says, I can't ally with Russia. And then the side plot that becomes the plot, Vladimir Lenin throws the Bolshevik Revolution and kills Tsar Nicholas II and his entire family, including Anastasia. Kills the entire family, and it looks like this is a people's revolution to overthrow a dictator. And Wilson's like, haha, the absolute monarch is gone. This looks like a people's movement. And Wilson could now join in as a battle between democracies and monarchies without being a hypocrite. And the U.S. goes to war. Yeah.
Didn't people say that like one of the guy's daughters like didn't die, that she like?
Yeah, that's Anastasia. It's like Russian legend, but it's not true.
She was.
That she escaped and went on and lived a great life. There's this cartoon about it. But no, it's the legend. Yeah, she died. They all died.